Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. So, today we are actually going to be analyzing chapters 2 and 3 of Hatchet. So, you should have already read these, and now we're going to talk about um, what these stories or what these chapters are about. So, we join Brian, our main character, Brian, in an airplane. He's flying to see his father in the Canadian wilderness up north, and the pilot has passed away. He apparently has had a heart attack. And so our chapter 2 opens with Brian basically being paralyzed with fear. It says, for a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. So he's just sitting there frozen, the fact that this pilot has just passed away. And so there are a lot of things to unpack there for Brian. Number one, he's just witnessed a human being die. And so that is a pretty traumatic event. Number two, he's in an airplane and he's the only other person in this small airplane. He's going somewhere he's never been. Um, there's not a whole lot that he can do. He's very in a very sticky situation. And so suddenly he remembers the plane. It says the pilot did not move um, as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. So, if you'll remember back, we've learned the word turbulence. It's where the air is not smooth and it causes bumpiness. And then Brian remembers the plane that is still flying somehow with the pilot not controlling it any longer. And so he realizes I've got to find some help. So he reaches over very cautiously. I'm sure you can imagine how he's feeling to touch the pilot and see if he's actually deceased, which he is. Um, and then he focuses his attention back on the plane. And so he realizes that if there is going to be any way for him to survive, he has got to fly the plane. Right now, it's angled toward the trees, which, if you know anything about gravity, um, that's not a good thing. We don't want to head down toward the ground. We want to stay flying. So, the pilot in chapter 1 had tried to teach Brian how to fly the plane. And so he is a little bit familiar now with how to operate the plane, but obviously not incredibly familiar. And so he starts to work on the plane. He has some little um, ups and downs where the plane is kind of jerking violently. And then he gets it evened out where he's just flying, which is great. Except, what is he going to do now? Because a plane can only stay in the air for as long as it has fuel. And so he realizes that there's a radio, and he decides that he can try to radio for help because other airplanes are in the vicinity, other airports should be able to hear him on the radio. So he gets the headset, tries to contact some people over the radio, and he's just screaming and crying and doesn't realize that the way that a radio works, you hold the button to speak and you have to let go to hear. So once he lets go, he hears someone is responding to him. But through all of the communication with the person who's responding, Brian doesn't know where he's at. The plane has veered off course. And so he is kind of, again, in a pretty sticky situation. And then he's losing signal. He's getting far enough into the wilderness that he can't contact anyone else. And so eventually he can't speak to anybody. And once again, he is alone. And that's a theme, a recurring theme in this story, is that Brian is alone. So the pilot dies, he's alone, he's trying to find help. He can't contact, he loses contact with the people in the radio, on the radio. He's alone, and you'll see that as we continue into the story. And so Um, Brian thinks to himself all the things that he knows about the plane, and he starts to kind of make a plan what he's going to do when it runs out of gas, out of fuel. And he decides that he's going to come down by the lake and try to slow the plane and get into the water, because the water obviously would be a little easier landing than just the ground. So Brian's talking to himself. He continues trying the radio, but he doesn't receive any communication back over the radio. And so he visualizes in his head, he continues thinking, okay, what am I going to do when this plane runs out of gas? And then it does, and it says Brian pushed the nose of the plane down and threw up. And I think that's a really great way for the author to let us know just how fearful Brian is, because um, he is in this plane that is going to crash. And so chapter 3 begins. Going to die, Brian thought. Going to die, going to die, going to die. His whole brain screamed in the sudden silence, gonna die. And so Brian is thinking one thing, that he's panicking, he's going to die because he's in an airplane, it has run out of gas, the pilot is dead. What is he going to do? And so he starts trying to enact his plan, trying to fly this plane that he doesn't know how to fly. And he ends up, in very vivid detail, crash landing into a lake. And so he is able to somehow get out of the plane, swim up to the water, and pull himself up onto land. And so that's where we leave Brian at the end of chapter 3. He's gone through this horrific crash. Obviously, you can imagine with all of this detail that the author gives us that Brian is going to be pretty injured, and he doesn't have anyone there to help him. He's in the wilderness, so you can imagine all of the things that are in the wilderness. There are wild animals, there are bugs. It's not a great situation to be in alone, but alone and injured is even worse. And you can go through and look at the detail that the author gives. He does a really great job of helping us visualize this crash. We can create some very vivid mental images. We talked about visualization last week. And so you can hear a wild crashing sound, ripping of metal. So you can hear what is going on. Someone was screaming. Um, the water tore at the windshield, shattered the side windows. Water drove him into the seat. Um, he's screaming. He doesn't even realize that he's screaming. He tore his nails loose on one hand as he's trying to get the seatbelt off. And so there are lots of very vivid images that you can see as you're reading this. So we're going to leave Brian at the end of this chapter. He is passed out from pain from the impact of the crash on the side of a lake.